You're going to learn a lot about a gentleman who had the foresight and the vision to take photographs in a very delicate way to preserve them for history. And it's just an amazing story. And there's this guy named Leo J. Kohn. Really, really neat individual with a lot of history here, just in Milwaukee and in EAA. So in November of 1945, Leo learned to fly in a J3 Cub. That was his solo. But he also ends up meeting a young man named Paul. Leo says, hey, I like taking pictures of airplanes. And so Paul, also known as Paul Poberezny, ended up signing this highly classified document and very secure piece of paper saying that Leo Kohn is authorized to take pictures on the Air National Guard ramp. So he starts here at this point in the late 40s, starting taking pictures and really kind of growing his aviation repertoire, as we say. This is book number 1 of the register of EAA members. And if you open it up, you can see number 1, Paul Poberezny, 2, Carl Schultz, 3, Robert Nolinsky, which also has a really important part in aviation history for EAA, and number 4, Leo J. Kohn. Isn't that cool? Leo goes on to not just be a member number 4, but he also signs the Articles of Incorporation for the organization. He was the first vice president of EAA, which is super neat. Finding out, not only putting the organization together, putting it down and say, yes, I'll be a member, but helping to found it. He ended up being EAA's first employee as well. This is his lifetime member card for Leo as number 4. This is a picture of Leo as he starts off. He ended up being not only the first employee, but eventually the senior editor of Sport Aviation magazine for a number of years. His work here was not only as someone to push paper and do all these things, but also take all these photos. And now with this honed skill of photography, he's really capturing some images that Dan is going to go over in a little bit. So he made the very difficult decision in 1972 to leave EAA. He was not done with aviation though. He started his own magazine, and that was the Armchair Aviator. And he was very meticulous in the pictures that he took, but also how he documented them. So this Armchair Aviator was really going back and saying, hey, I think people are interested in the history, and I think they're interested in the actual pictures themselves. He started this magazine. He also started Air Photos, which you could go and buy. Yep, that one's next. You could buy some of these images from him. So he's sending this order form at the back of the magazine, fill it out, and you can get those copies of those photos. He continued to photograph these things, and his son Bill and Mary talk about how he did it and what the process was like. Bill most times tagged along with his dad. They'd go to airports, they'd stop and take a picture of an airplane, and not only tagged along, but a lot of time he was pressed into service. So he had a camera bag that when he was young was too heavy for him. So there's scuff marks on the bottom of this leather camera bag from him dragging it along the ground. But he noticed how meticulous and how patient his dad was. He said many times his dad would stop, see an airplane, and sit there for hours, waiting for the right cloud conditions, waiting for no people to be around. And if he was about to take one and something changed, he'd stop and go back to it. Dan's going to talk about the camera in a little bit, but these cameras only had a limited amount of exposures. And unlike the current photography method of cell phones, we can't take 1,000 photos and then pick the best one. He had to get the shot right the first time. One of Leo's last conversations with Bill was that I don't want my collection to go someplace where it's never going to see the light of day. He said, don't let my collection die somewhere in a basement or in a back storeroom. And so after his passing, the family really didn't know what to do, but they connected with the Wisconsin Aviation Hall of Fame and said, hey, we have this collection. Are you at all interested in any of this? And thankfully, they said, yes, we are. And we kept having these conversations months after months, and it started to become this logistical issue. Well, how are we going to move it all? Well, who has enough cars? And so I leaned over to someone to my right and said, how big of a collection is this? Is this 100, 200? And they whispered back, more than 30,000 photos. And this is a picture of just a few of the cabinets that they're stored in. If you open each one of these drawers, those are all negatives. Now, it's an estimation because I think what Dan did when he came on board is he took a bunch, he counted them, and then he did some math and said, I think we're more like 34,000. And every one of these negatives that Bill took has a data card with it. Data card shows the N number, where it was taken, the date it was taken, many times who it was owned by, the color scheme of the aircraft, because this was all black and white photos back then. Powered by, all that kind of thing. And it also has, and Dan will talk about this in a minute, a very unique filing system. And then we go on, and all those collect air photos and all the work that he did, there's also photos that he didn't take, and photographs from other people, all organized by type of aircraft. Just an absolute treasure trove of all this information. Great pictures, black and white, some have people, some don't. And as you start to pull open these drawers and go through it, 30,000 becomes a much bigger number than what you envision it, right? It's like when someone says, oh, I've got $1 million. Oh, that's not bad. Well, that's 1 million bottles of water. And then you pick up a bottle of water and go, oh, that's a lot of space. What are we going to do with that? Right? So as we start to work through these, and we look at this and we go, how in the world are we going to do anything with this that would honor Leo's vision? It took a few years for us to figure that out. And it took us the right time with the right people and the right technology to figure out what we're going to do next. And for that piece, I'm going to hand it over to the smart guy in the room. Please help me welcome Mr. Dan Silvers.
All right. So I'm going to talk about the negatives and the envelopes and kind of how we're capturing the data and the images. Leo primarily shot photographs using a Kodak 616 camera. It's kind of an oddball format that we're not finding a lot of photographers that actually are familiar with that format. The camera was first produced in 1932, and the film was discontinued in 1984. So 616's film is quite large. It's 4 1/4 inch wide and 2.5 inches tall. One reason that Leo's images look as good as they are is because they are enormous. Here's a comparison to 35 millimeter, which I think most of you are probably familiar with. 616 film, it's enormous compared to 35. The collection's primarily 616 size negatives. However, his collection does include quite a few other media types, including slides. There's some 35 millimeter, but he would actually seek out 616 and 120 size negatives for their ease of reproduction. And here's a typical photograph taken by Leo. The subject has a sharp focus, there's no people, there's no tie-down ropes, and no clouds in the sky. And as Kurt mentioned, you just have extreme patience waiting for people and objects and clouds to move out of the frame of shot. If an aircraft was exceptional, unique, or rare, Leo would take numerous photographs. For some reason, this camel was of particular interest to Leo because it appears he used an entire roll of film on it. This tri-motor is one of our favorites. And there's a lot going on. There's people in the background. One of the more interesting things to digest is actually the backgrounds. Everyone that's had exposure to Leo's photos just loves the backgrounds because there's just so much to observe. So this is kind of an interesting photo because it's a vertical photo, and it allows us to show off the amazing quality of these negatives. Just keep in mind the tail of a tri-motor is quite tall. I think it's like, we'll say 10 feet. I don't think it's more than that. But the negative is only 4 1/4 by 2.5. So you can actually see the data plate kind of near where the tail wheel is. So if we zoom in, you can actually read it. That's serial 39. So this actual airplane in these photos is hanging in the Smithsonian.
There you go.
It's the same one, which is pretty cool. And we're finding this with a lot of photos in this collection. This is another one of our favorite photos. This photo was taken by Bill Larkins in 1947, and as Kurt mentioned, a lot of negatives come from other photographers. He traded negatives, he bought negatives, that kind of thing. So he really was interested about preserving these photos of airplanes here. So if we also do the zoom thing again, you can see the faces in the crowd, the ripples in the pants. You can see someone hold on to a kid. It's a fun photo. For the Stinson, for example, you can see the intricate detail of the pitot system. You can read the Antique Airplane Association decal. It's all very readable. So let's talk about the negatives. It's kind of a fun little snippet to show you kind of the scale of the project. Here's what a typical envelope looks like. If you start in the top right, the Kohn number, that's the unique identifier of this envelope. Each one is stored sequentially. The photo profile, we're going to go kind of counterclockwise here. The photo profile is the position of the camera in relation to the subject. So it looks like this is a seaplane and he's kind of front right a little bit. And because it's black and white, he also documents the colors. We of course have the aircraft type, the registration, usually the location, the date. If the owner information was available, he documented that. We have engine info and serial numbers and when it was manufactured. So that it's quite expansive. And this is really what makes this collection extraordinary is these envelopes and this kind of metadata and detail. And if there's any bonus information, like this is a float plane, he documented the model of floats. And again, we're seeing a lot of museum pieces. This particular P-51 that flew in the air races was rebuilt and is in the New England Air Museum. As we kind of work through the digitization process, here's kind of a really challenging envelope that someone would have to type up manually. However, modern text recognition on this metadata has been kind of interesting. So we can actually run this through the same imaging software that's actually on your iPhone or your Mac, and it's able to pull out all the text. It finds the text, it reads it, and all we have to do is give it an image. I don't have to do anything else. And it spits out all of this. So if we have a way to organize all this, which is coming down the pipeline, but all the important bits are right there. We know the type, we know the number, we know where it is, and it's quite good. It's so good. It's so good, in fact, that his typewriter had a broken number 1 key. So if you look at Chicago, Illinois, the lowercase l in Illinois is the same key as serial number 1. So the software is able to actually take context into account and detect whether you need a letter or a number, even though it's the same character on the envelope. We got photos from all over the globe. We got photos from Australia, Japan, Germany, Italy, Mexico, Cuba, and there's even pictures of Soviet Union aircraft landing in New York. There's also stories attached to a lot of these airplanes, and this isn't the best photo, but this is a fun story. This is a B-17 after the war that was converted by Vega for executive transport. And since the post-war newspaper business was booming, the Chicago Tribune bought one of these for their business. So yes, the Chicago Tribune owned a B-17. And you can zoom in and see, yeah, that's pretty cool. You might be familiar with Bill Brennan and Buster. They won the 1947 Goodyear race. We have 3 photos of Bill hanging out with his airplane right here at the Oshkosh airport, so here, which is pretty special. And here's another photo of Buster, and that's with the Milwaukee skyline in the background. There used to be an airport on the lakefront of Milwaukee. And of course, that airplane's in the Smithsonian too. So the idea now is we're working on digitizing the whole collection. We're raising funds for that. And then the entire collection is going online. The metadata is going to be searchable, so you can search by aircraft type. Anything on those envelopes can be searchable. We're going to try to put them on a map. We're going to try to put together a timeline so you can follow his travels, because he did some pretty extensive traveling. And there'll be collections, and we're going to try to tie in and find airplanes that are currently flying too, because all that's public too. So that's kind of a prototype. That's not what the website's going to look like. That was just kind of a proof of concept we threw together, but that's it's coming. And here's Kurt.
So we found this letter written by Leo to a gentleman named Mr. L.L. Brown. And the cool thing about it is Leo started to say, hey, I'm not only taking pictures, I have this reach and I might be able to collect other photos that are out there and then preserve them so they don't end up somewhere. So if you read through it, my reason for asking is to ferret out the many smaller collections such as yours that are tucked away in an envelope or a box in a desk drawer. And the last sentence says, after all, this was the reason the photo was taken in the first place, to preserve a record of the particular plane. So we think, as we start to think about the legacy and what Leo asked of his son Bill and of his children right before he passed, you start to kind of think about what's the greatest way we can do this. And the greatest way is to continue to raise the funds so that we can not only preserve his collection, but then have the possibility through this process that we're developing to start to preserve other collections. And what a treasure trove of negatives, of photos that could be to anybody who's interested, but also people who are restoring airplanes. The rivet level detail that Dan and Scott came up with to get down so close and see exactly where something is placed may not be possible without Leo's work. So with Leo, he started off with a great idea and started off with Paul on this great thing called EAA. And we've been handed this opportunity and we want to make sure it continues. Part of that is through raising funds. Part of it is just recognizing who he was and what he had in mind. And our ask to you today is to consider how you might be able to participate in that, either with your own photos or with helping us raise money for it. We have a budget of $65,000 for the whole project. We've raised $31,000 so far, so we're almost there. But I like to tell a story a lot of times from the Voyager book that said they were trying to raise money and someone sent in a $3 donation and said in a small note, "Don't laugh, I don't get lunch today." That level of participation, that level of dedication to anything that any group tries to do is more important than any large donation or large check that we can get from some big corporation or grant. It's the people that make it happen. It's the people that took the photos. And it's the people that are going to continue sharing it. So I ask you to have fun with us, participate, go see the museum piece that we put together, check out our magazine, memberships help, but also look for a website that's coming up because you're going to see some incredible stuff. And the most amazing thing is we don't even know what's there yet. So check out a website, give us a call, give us an email with anything that you have, with any ideas that you have. And I hope that you'll join us on this journey. And I also hope that we've left a little bit of time for questions if you have any. So thanks for coming. We appreciate it.